Hello, good afternoon, or good morning if you're joining us stateside. Welcome to our Rethinking Resource Management in the PMO webinar this afternoon. We'll just give a couple of seconds for everybody to join us. If you are going to be at your PC or you're not just on your phone, do open the chat window, say hello, and ask any questions or provide some comments as we go through the session. We've got Lindsay on, who's going to be looking through all of those questions. And if you're brave, you can kind of put your hand up and we'll quite happy come over to you so you can ask the question live if you want to. So just some quick introductions first then. My name is Eileen Roden. I'm one of the directors here at the House of PMO. Work with Lindsay on producing the report. Very much been there, seen it, done it in a number of organisations. So it was interesting to go through the report and relive some of the pain having introduced resource management in a number of organisations. As you may be aware, Prosymmetry have been a real supporter of House of PMO over the years, and always our kind of primary sponsor at our conferences. And so as a provider of purpose-built resource management solutions, there was really no question as to who we would get to contribute to the report with us. So I'm delighted to have Samantha Varner with us from Prosymmetry. If you like to say hello, Samantha, because you're going to be dealing with some of the questions today.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So great to meet you. So happy to be on today. Like Eileen said, we have a pretty deep and long-standing partnership with the House of PMO. So I'm really excited to be here today, really excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. Samantha, you've been kind of working with clients for several years now, kind of dealing with some of those resource management problems and challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been with Prosymmetry for going on 6 years now. I started as a customer success manager. I led quite a few implementations for some of our largest customers. And now I am more on the product marketing side, but those years of experience, I've worked with a majority of our customers, anywhere from an IT PMO, an enterprise PMO, even internal audit and their resource planning and things like that. So, just a lot of conversations over the last 6 years. And when we first read the report, it just aligned with everything we are hearing from our own customers and the processes we've helped them create and the things that we've helped them do in our product, Tempest Resource. So yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Excellent. Well, as I said, Samantha and I are going to have a conversation about our findings in the report, and again, how Samantha and her customers are dealing with that using their software. But if you do have any questions, either in any of the processes or kind of specifically around the software, do feel free to add them in chat. I just wanted to give a little bit of background around kind of why we did resource management. So for those of you who followed us for a while, back in 2017, we did our first Beyond Timesheets report called The Challenges and Realities of Resource Management. And it was really because at that time when we were looking at some of our colleagues and the professionals that we were working with around the globe, it always seemed to come out on top as the most consistent challenge. We thought it was going to be benefits management, but that really always kind of was taking second place now to resource management. And so we did this first report, and a lot of the conversations were really about, kind of timesheeting and making sure we've got people available to projects. But actually, it was a lot more kind of nuanced about that. There was very much more we needed to have conversations around capacity planning, project prioritization and how availability fed into that whole process. And so back in 2017, we produced this first report, and we created, with the help of some of our contributors, this concept of the circle of resource management, where we developed 3 different segments to look at: the resource segment, the portfolio segment, and the project segment. And so that report has been around and it's been really useful. People have kind of still refer back to that. We've used it on some of the courses at PMO Learning. But if you kind of come forward now to kind of where we were in 2025, the landscape within which we're changing projects has really kind of quite changed. And also in terms of where PMOs are in organizations has progressed quite significantly. And although, you know, resource management as a problem, as a thing that needs to be addressed is still there, there are now some very kind of different things that we need to start thinking about, including, you know, kind of dealing with hybrid delivery, prioritization and shifting priorities. You know, kind of, we only need to say the word COVID, and everything kind of changes much more dynamically perhaps than it did back in 2017. We're also seeing projects now being delivered across the whole organization using different methods and processes. And very much kind of, there's a much more generic understanding about projects being aligned to strategy rather than it being a couple of organizations seem to have that sussed. So really, we decided back end of really of 2024, it was about time to go back and just have a look to see how much the environment really had changed, how the kind of the processes and approaches had changed, and again, watching how software had been developed to really kind of support PMOs and organizations in that. And so what we came up with in 2024, the kind of 2025, the report was earlier this year, was a report and an updated model that reflects the realities and how we want to kind of move forward in dealing with those challenges going forward. So that's really kind of where we're trying to kind of explore and have some further discussions to help people understand the model, but also to help them understand how they can move forward and use tools and systems to address the specific challenges in their organization. As you'll appreciate, the model is generic, and hopefully what we'll talk about today is some kind of real kind of specific challenges that might resonate with you and your organizations. So just for those perhaps who haven't seen the model, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the model. We've done a previous couple of webinars. There was a talk at the conference, which Lindsay is going to put some links in chat. If you do want to have a full copy of the report, which includes the contribution from Prosymmetry, you can download that from our website. If you're a member, if you're a non-member, it is available there to purchase. But let's just kind of take you a quick look through the different segments before we get into some of the conversation. So the first segment we looked at is portfolio. So this is really about the top-down approach, where we're looking at an organization level is, can we actually deliver what we want to deliver in order to achieve our strategy? And very much kind of when we did the first report, it was very much about right-sizing the organization to make sure we had, it was really just focused on capacity. However, now we're kind of looking in 2025, it's gone to a little bit more detail, and again, as you said, become quite a bit more sophisticated. So rather than just saying, have we got the right number of bodies, it's very much more based around competency and capability. Have we got kind of the right, can we actually, is it achievable by our organization? And rather than kind of working out, you know, kind of who was going to do the work, now the actual prioritization itself is being influenced by the resources available and the skills within the organization. And what we're starting to do, what we're starting to see now, is that aligned with how the strategy is in terms of 3 to 5 years, we're also starting to look at organization planning 3 to 5 years ahead to look at how we're going to need those kind of individuals with the kind of the right workforce, with the skills and competencies for the next 3 to 5 years. So we're moving to a much longer planning horizon when it comes to resource management. So that's the portfolio segment. The second segment that we looked at is the project segment. Now, this is probably the area that, excuse me, most people think of when they think of resource management. So this is the bit where we're actually kind of trying to, we're in a project and we're supporting project and program managers, and they want people on board, and they want them allocated to tasks, and we want to know how much kind of time and effort is going to be involved, and when the work's done and when they can switch to other tasks. So this is really kind of that, really probably the most kind of dynamic segment of them all. And dynamic really is the word that kept coming back time and time again, is that actually we want some real-time data now. We can't wait for weeks and months to have the latest status report of when people are coming available. We now want it immediately, almost within the hour, kind of, if not to the minute. That's kind of very different in terms of kind of data requirements. And that ability to flex really drives a level of agility, small a, within the PMO and the processes and who gets to go where in team allocation, and being able to kind of do that in a way that is data driven, but it's been decided by the right individuals, but it also becomes visible then to everybody who's going to be involved or is going to be impacted by those decisions. Now, I think what we also find when we get down to this project segment, one of the key roles from a PMO perspective is dealing with conflict management. And I don't necessarily mean conflict management in terms of, kind of project managers and fisticuffs in the car park fighting over resources, but certainly in terms with dealing with some resource requests where people are asking for the same individuals, or there's perhaps a kind of a conversation about kind of prioritization of projects. My project is more important than yours. And so we're often the people who, again, not necessarily the people who are making the decisions on kind of who should have whom in terms of resources and which project is a higher prioritization, but certainly being that kind of facilitator and the kind of the vehicle by which those decisions are being made and implemented effectively and efficiently and in the right kind of way. Because one of the things that we also kind of find where there's conflict, it has to be done in a way where people are confident they can come back to us again because we deal with it in the right way without causing even more upset. So I always think the project segment is sometimes can be the one that is the one where most of the adrenaline is, I would suggest, from a PMO perspective. But there is kind of the third segment, which not all PMOs necessarily have dealt with in any great detail, but it is becoming more and more part of the PMO's role, is this resource segment, which is where we're starting to look at what the skills and competencies are of the individuals. And we've done it from a PMO perspective, but organizations are very much more focused on kind of what the level of competence is around the individuals and a recognition of the types of skills that are actually required in order to be able to deliver projects and programs. So really kind of everybody's become much more aware of kind of skills and competencies. And because of that kind of longer term prioritization horizon that we talked about in the portfolio segment, there's now much more conversation in terms of career pathing from PMO to projects and projects to programs and even programs back into kind of up into portfolio or into the PMO. So people are kind of building on their skills. And actually PMO, we always talk about the relationship between PMO and HR, PMO and finance, but very much PMO and HR are becoming much more a tighter knit team as well. And I think the other bit, which kind of almost kind of adds a whole different nuance to this, is about sustainability and well-being. No longer do we just kind of have everybody kind of resourced up to the hill, kind of 45 hours a week plus another 15 hours overtime a week. There's very much more an understanding in terms of how we flex our resourcing model, how we use consultants and contractors and come from the external market, and have that kind of long-term workforce planning, not just from an organization, but at a project by project or a program by program level. So really interesting to see kind of how this whole area has developed and how the PMO and the systems and tools and processes that we use have also had to develop in line with that. One of the things that came out kind of quite strongly in the report is that we can't just look at resource management as a kind of a set of processes and putting people in holes. There are some kind of organizational constraints that mean that how we do things here might be very different how we do things in other organizations. So the context, kind of what kind of projects do we deliver? Are they very much driven through kind of legal requirements? Are they very much kind of customer projects? Are they real kind of strategic programs that are supported in collaboration with other organizations? Or are they all internal projects? That really will kind of perhaps drive in terms of kind of how rigid or flexible some of our resourcing strategies might be. So we talk about that kind of that overall kind of context. Again, from a cultural perspective, there are still organizations which kind of I still kind of wonder how difficult it must be, where it's very much they work in silo mentalities. Trying to get resources shared across the organization is incredibly difficult, and kind of there's a 10-week waiting process and 27 forms you've got to fill in. So some of the kind of the culture that drives some of that bureaucracy has to be taken into consideration. But also a big thing that was kind of that came with this latest report was an understanding of the organization's capability. Not necessarily individual competence, but the capability, the processes, the systems, and the tools they have to support the processes and the conversations around resource management. So very much kind of the world has moved on. The report hopefully kind of deals with that in a whole number of ways. And I'm interested, Samantha, in terms of kind of your experience, because as you said in your introductions, you've been around and watched the market move and watched the customer's environment move. And obviously your tool has progressed to support the marketplace.
Yeah. No, I think this conversation is one that is super relevant today and is extremely important. So, we have evolved our product. We started as a pure resource management, capacity planning, forecasting product. We really started with our what if simulation. So, modeling those scenarios and understanding, okay, based on your rough guess of your resource allocation in these legacy tools, if you will, where can you start your work and who's going to be over allocated and whatnot. And we have really progressed over time with the market to understand exactly as your report in 2017 said. We are now looking, back then it was more about just the act of resource management, and really it's no longer task planning and assigning people to tasks. It's now getting into the details of what's the capacity like and what are the conflicts here and things like that. Over the years, we have seen as well this shift to more skills planning and role-based planning, where people are bringing that up. These organizations are bringing their resource planning up to that higher level to be able to say, okay, if we go top down, we are going to understand our strategy. We are going to understand the portfolios that are going to support that strategy. Fantastic. But at that portfolio level, when you're planning that out at that project intake level, so when you go top down, you have to understand, hold on, do we have the skills to even execute this portfolio and what we're trying to execute? Deloitte recently put out an article where they shared an experience with one of their customers. It was a telecommunications agency in Europe, and they wanted to expand their 5G access and really try to move into that market. And the one thing they realized is they don't have the workforce that has those skills in order to do that. Now they're looking many years ahead, right? They're looking those 3 to 5 years. So this was really a long game, definitely a planning horizon here. And that led them to have the conversation with their PMO, with HR, with their finance team to understand, do we now go try to recruit these people from our competitors who we know are probably doing this too? Are we going to upskill our own organization? What's the timeline on that? Who do we have today? And they were able to make very strategic decisions because they looked at that top level to understand it's not enough to know who we need. We need to know what we need in order to achieve this. And the one thing I really liked about that, and the one thing I think is super important that you said, Eileen, is you're right. PMOs have worked very closely with finance, but we haven't necessarily worked very closely with HR teams. And, HR teams are recruiting. They're the ones bringing the people in. They're the ones who understand, skills and what people have. And so the partnership there really has to be like a one-to-one to communicate the needs of the PMO, how the PMO is supporting the company strategy, how it's going to move the company forward, and what that's going to look like today, tomorrow, 3, 5 years down the road. So that top down is absolutely crucial when it comes to our customers. And that's what we're starting to see is more and more of that higher level planning. Now, from that bottom up perspective, everything that you had mentioned before and what people have been doing over the years, the individual projects, maybe they are approved, maybe there really was no consideration for resources in that approval process. And they get to the starting point, they get to their kickoff meeting, and they're realizing that the people they need, not even roles, but individual people they need, are also working on three different projects. The priorities of the work are conflicting. And now they're going to the functional manager going, okay, well, I need Samantha for this. And it's my timeline is dependent on this. And this is my project. And I have all of these deliverables to hit. And that's very reactive, like very reactive. It's helpful because you are understanding, the resource management piece of it, the day to day. You're no longer looking at just timesheet information. You're understanding, the plan for the next month, quarter, whatever. But that's where people typically start. And the bottom up approach, it's not just bottom in terms of an active project. It needs to be bottom up in terms of working with the functional managers, understanding what those conflicts are, understanding, especially with organizations, when you start getting into someone's planning waterfall, someone's planning agile. There's people who are on agile teams. There's people who are then doing individual work on waterfall style projects and working with these managers to really understand the context of what work is going on across the organization. So that bottom up is not just planning at the individual active project. I'm blinders on as a project manager. It is really understanding the entire context of all of the work that's going on and what that timeline is. What I think is super powerful in our product, of course, but also just the thought process around it and making sure that this is part of the processes is that what if simulation area. So, like I said, our product started as a what if simulation, but then from there, we've added on, all of the capacity planning and forecasting and demand planning and project intake and now all of the portfolio level things of budget and strategy and KPIs and targets and all of those lovely items that are very important. But that what if simulation is going to tell you, fantastic, you need all of these roles, like your entire portfolio does. That's great based on the priority and or we're going to prioritize now. What does the timeline look like? Not every project can start Jan 1. Assuming we have a January 1 start date, not every project can start Jan 1. So what are we doing? Like when can these things start and how can we be strategic about it? So that what if simulation.
And I think what you brought there, Samantha, is a really interesting point in that doing that what if isn't
Yeah.
just from a project manager's perspective, doing that what if from a resource manager's perspective. I
Yes.
think, kind of nobody's really considered that in the past. It's just a case of I'm interested in projects. It's seen to be a project-based system, but actually the resource managers who are potentially have got business as usual want to
Mhm.
do what if from their perspective as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that's kind of we have a medical device product engineering team who they approached their resource management practices with like project managers first. It was the project managers saying either specifically we need these people, and then they started to really change that mindset into no, our functional managers should be doing that resource management first. So understanding, again, the grand scheme of things, what is going on? When are we going to be over allocated? Who can I pull here because they're better there? And just getting more strategic about it. That piece of resource management, when you have someone who is very much closer to your resources, is one of the things that I think took that organization specifically, like they're hitting, timelines and looking at across the organization when it comes to product development, not just the engineers who have to work on it or things to that effect. So you're very much right. That what if simulation being a resource manager, a functional manager, that is 100% an area that they need to be looking at too. One of the examples of that as well, and to talk about that bottom up, I recently, not recently, it's probably been about 3 years now, implemented a telecommunications organization here in the US. And there for them, they had resource analysts. They already had a more mature PMO when it came to the resource planning side of the house. They were using Excel. That's Excel, everyone comes to us from Excel. That everyone
Absolutely.
has it. I get it. It's easy, it's fine. But they came to us from Excel and their organization, I mean, they were spending 40 hours a month on trying to report. So to your point earlier, they're looking at lagging indicators. Like you need real time. You need to understand what's going on today in order to be able to pivot as you need, especially in this environment that we have going on. Um, and for them, they would take those what if models into their leadership meetings and say, okay, you want to bring this in, you want us to do this. Here are the three things that are going to be at risk and the three teams that are going to be over allocated. What decisions are we making based on this data? And so for their resource analysts who were so used to working in Excel, they were now able to truly say they didn't have to like, copy that, save as that Excel file. Let's move some numbers around. Okay, this is scenario number one, and we can't really see how it's going to end up with everything else. And okay, let's save that one as, and let's do scenario number two. They created the scenarios, had multiple tabs open to run through each one. Okay, what if this happened? Someone's asking about this. Okay, you just slide something over, or you add more to the team. What if we did that in real time? And data-driven decisions, I mean, that's like, the PMO should be able to provide that data-driven decisions to your leadership.
Yeah, and I think as much as I applauded Excel, and we've all been fans of Excel, um,
Yes.
and it has been great, and I would argue for certain situations it is, but as soon as you're starting to get any number of resources, multiple projects with different priorities, there are
Yeah.
so many shifting factors that
Yes.
even the most experienced Excel players, you're almost building a system yourself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
you're beyond really the kind of the using the tool, the Excel tool to be what it was actually kind of created for. So there does get to a point where actually where you're in an organization with kind of multiple factors where you really need to kind of do something a
Yeah.
little bit different, a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah. And to that point too, what we're seeing today in the current day report is Excel is so flat. It doesn't have the context of the skills. It doesn't have the context of the capacity. You may have people who, here in the States, 40 hours a week is your full time, but you may have people who are at 30, 20. What is that? You may have a global team where I think in the UK, like the average is like a 37.5-hour work week. And so that those Excel files are so flat that they just don't give that context when it comes to capacity. Excuse me, when it comes to capacity, and then especially when it comes to skills and capability, it's not there. You can't do it. So that's why, I'm from Prosymmetry. I'm going to talk about our products. That's why adding all of this together, specifically with Tempest Resource and the resource capacity planning, but also Tempest Portfolio, where you can do both the top down and the bottom up and have a true portfolio management system for the entire organization, the enterprise. That's such a game changer for organizations.
Which is a good kind of segue in then to kind of having a look at kind of at the some of the sections in a little bit more detail. And we're going to start off at that sort of portfolio segment where, as we said, organizations now understand, I think, across the board, that actually the only reason we do projects is to deliver our strategy, and
Yeah.
therefore the prioritization and the selection of the projects that we want to undertake and the ones that we can undertake are really those that are kind of aligned to that strategy. And so at this portfolio level, it's about saying, kind of where are our resources and how can we put them and deliver most value towards our strategy.
Mhm.
Um, so interestingly, I'm understanding in terms of kind of how resource management is now feeding into that prioritization and project approval process.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a few things here because it's kind of like a chicken or the egg conversation. You are an organization because you are executing something, you're delivering something, whether it's services or products. So there's clearly work that goes on. But in order to deliver that work, you need to have enough people and the right people. So what I'm finding with this higher level roll-ups of the portfolio planning is every project, it's not just a business case review. It's not just a what's the ROI based on the budget, what's the competitive landscape. All of those things are very important. I'm not saying they're not, but now it's Can we deliver this with the type of people that we have, with the skills that we have? And if you can't, then you should not be green lighting that project. That work should not be moving forward because you're setting yourself up for failure from there. And it needs to be a conversation to that like core and flex methodology or thought process that you guys have in the report of, okay, we have enough people within the organization with the skills to do a majority of the work, but are we now going to go contract out? Or, what is that? And that's a changing your entire workforce process there. But yeah, when it comes to that portfolio and that higher level, you are really planning with those higher level generic demand planning, as we call them, roles, skills to understand, okay, if this project were to get green lighted, do we even have the capability to do this? And I think that's one of the things that, that supports the workforce planning, that supports, the strategic alignment. I mean, there's so many things there that level of resource planning really helps when it comes to that project intake and planning.
And Matilda's got a question, and it's kind of one of the ones that we're going to talk about around if we're going to kind of go and do this at portfolio planning, where
Yeah.
it sometimes feels a big, huge leap for organizations to
Mhm.
suddenly be able to kind of map their future demand and kind of have all of this kind of data available. Is there a path people can follow to gradually build up the data to increase the level of detail and the horizon that they can plan around?
Yes, definitely. And I am not the type of person to say it depends without kind of giving you two different paths. So I really think it depends on the maturity of your PMO today. So if you have some, basic resource management, we're assigning this person to this project for this percentage, maybe the functional manager is getting involved, start that bottom up approach. Start rolling that data up to that portfolio level to understand, okay, here are the roles that we needed for all of this work. Here are the skills that they had. Here's, how much we needed, all of those things. So if you're already doing that today and you have that down, start with that, start bottom up. That is perfectly fine. Now, if this is something where you're not used to, the resource management and allocation and things like that, start top down and understand, okay, for, like I said, that project intake, with every project that's coming in or being proposed, what is it going to take to get it done? And start at that highest level. Start with the roles. You don't even have to start with the skills to even get there if that's overwhelming, because we will probably have that
Yeah,
conversation as well. But just start with those roles to understand. And again, you're still doing you're rolling up to the portfolio, but it really is that top-down approach. So I like to say we do not need to make this harder than it is. Simple is going to get us somewhere. So it really just depends on where you are today and what you're used to today.
Do you know, I love that I'm going to pinch that, Samantha. Simple is going to get us somewhere. What a fantastic, I do like that phrase. That's what I'm going to pinch.
Yeah.
So I think that's great at the portfolio level. We've already started kind of getting some questions. We're going to move into my adrenaline segment here, which is kind of where we're talking about kind of working with the kind of the project teams and the project managers, where we're really looking to do that kind of dynamic allocation. Um, what have you found from a PMO perspective? How are they adjusting their approaches to actually to do more kind of fluid, iterative ways of working and using the systems to do that?
Yes. So, I have two main thoughts here. One is for those organizations who are operating in like a mixed methodology, is what we like to call it. So you have projects that are more waterfall style, you have agile teams and, sprints and all of those things. And then you have projects that are more like, keep the business running. We got to make sure that these applications are running and things like that, where it's not necessarily waterfall, it's more about maintenance. In these mixed methodology organizations, you can and should be still tracking your resources, how much time or FTE percentage or effort, whatever that is for you. How much time are we expecting them to do this? And is something about to ramp up? Or is something about to cut back because there's a change in the market? So you should still be doing this for those mixed method areas. And of course, a plug for Tempest, we have ways to do that to plan both by individuals, by roles, by agile teams, all of those things, and really bringing that data all together. So that's one thing I do like to say here when we get to that adrenaline point. I really like how you said that. Is you should be planning by all of this because you need the context of the entire organization, which then leads me to I had another medical device company, a different one. They implemented Tempest about 2 years ago now, and part of the implementation of Tempest was weekly project steering committee, whatever you want to call it, meetings, where they were not just meeting one on one to be like, okay, what's the health of my project? What's the status report of my project? Not saying that's not important, but in that meeting, they were going, okay, project manager, you're requesting Samantha more on this project, but Samantha's functional manager only approved her for this month. Why are you requesting Samantha? Samantha's also working on these things. And so to me, it's that relentless communication because things are going to change. Pivots, we're pivoting, we're changing, nothing is certain anymore. So you that communication and no one wants more meetings. I completely understand that. But by having this communication, your project managers are understanding the context of what else Samantha is working on. And oh, your project is a lower priority. That's nothing on you. That's just a reality of the situation. So no, Samantha's not getting approved on this, but you can have this person, or oh, you're going to get delayed or something like that. So for here, it's just relentless communication across everyone, not just individual silos.
And I think that kind of links into the question that Elburn has asked in the chat here about resource planning is very challenging, but kind of what do you suggest when projects have slippage, which has knock-on implications to the pipeline? And we've got this kind of mixture between, it impacts the project area, but also has this link into the portfolio section as well.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of let's plan for that. Let's overestimate maybe how much we're going to need, specific people or roles. So not by a lot, it needs to be somewhat realistic, but let's plan for that. Additionally, when it comes to that slippage, whether, for whatever reason, that's where a lot of our users today are using that what if scenario planning. So, on the front end, they're using it to understand timelines and sequences and what we need to do for our workforce. But in the day to day, they're going to that model to say, this project's going to slip. It's going to go, 2 months extra, we'll say. What is that going to do? I still need all of this people to do this. What is that going to do? What conversations do I need to be having? And then from there, it's all about priority, in my opinion. What is priority to get done? And that, sometimes it's your project. And guess what? You're getting the slippage and you're getting the resources extended. And that's just that. And sometimes it's not. So having those conversations about trade-offs and what's going to be missed, and what priorities are going to have to shift. And understanding, where are the resources, where are they needed, what is the biggest impact?
I think there's a couple of things there that Tiff now, and I would just want to bring in another question from a I was going to say listener, a webinar attendee. Interestingly, when we do that kind of what if scenario at the portfolio level,
Yep.
the very fact that we've done that means we might already have some of the answers for slippages when we
Yes.
actually kind of get into that kind of project level, because we've all already been through a number of thought processes. So we don't necessarily lose all of that thinking. We've got all of that and think of, well, actually, we've done 3 or 4 of these what ifs, so we already know what some of those kind of responses might be. Almost kind of as risk mitigation. But I think the other interesting bit here, which is kind of one of our Matilda's asked again, which is about we've got this real kind of challenge between balancing off our internal projects with our customer projects when we're using the same resource pool, because we're not kind of two separate groups of individuals. We're all
Yeah.
working on both of those projects. And that's going to be another situation that actually being able to categorize projects and look at where the resources are being used is going to be key.
Yes, 100%. We another organization of ours, they bought our product to really support their IT PMO. They make like fryers and kitchen, like commercial kitchen equipment for a lot of restaurants that I'm sure are in the States and in the UK as well. But what they did eventually is they understood how beneficial it was for the IT team, where they are working on internal projects, I should say. Those projects support the customer, products that they're delivering and the things going on, but it's considered internal. They saw the benefit of extending this to their product team where they have contracts with customers. There are things coming down the pipeline and, opportunities being, won every day. So for them, it was like, this is a no-brainer. We have to make sure that this work is all connected. We can see absolutely everything. And you're right. It is the same resource pool. It is your similar, it is the same resource pool. It's the same organization. So really bringing all of that in to get that bigger picture. They should not, of course, they're categorized differently and they should be, but that's all work that needs to get done. So it should be, in my opinion, that your resource plan should extend to all of those types of projects.
I'm just conscious of the time, and I just want to kind of get on to
Yeah.
the last section, which is kind of working within the resource section. And as I mentioned earlier, an awful lot of PMOs don't often delve into this kind of section into any great detail because they may have had their kind of hands slapped by HR, but
Yeah.
it's definitely becoming, especially as the kind of the different skills that are required to deliver projects seem to have become even more kind of segmented than they used to have, because of the various different types of projects that are being undertaken. And I'm with Lindsay. Yes, it is the nicest section. It's the bit that I love. I love people development, and I love having people who are kind of up and skilled for their work. But actually, this is an area, as you mentioned before, Samantha, that organizations perhaps don't have the level of detail that have been in that need to be in place in order to understand the skills and competencies required to deliver projects. And that's something that organizations may have to do some work on in order
Yeah.
to get some of the kind of the real benefits of, as we said, that feeds into prioritization and obviously some key questions around kind of skills overlap, because people have more than one skill and therefore they've got options in terms of which skill individuals are going to be using it at a project level. So just interesting in terms of kind of how people are building up that kind of skills inventory information.
Yeah. So, you're right. HR, it's kind of like a slap on the wrist of why would you want that information? Whether people are taking a skills assessment annually, so that way HR has this information. It is kind of a slap on the wrist. Where I recommend organizations start is build that partnership with HR, build that partnership with the people who own that data, and explain to them why they're important, like that communication piece of it. Also, we tend to find as well that the skills that HR is tracking may not be applicable to the skills that you need in order to execute your portfolio.
It may just be project management, tick.
Ex Yes, exactly. And it's like, of course, you're a PMO. Everyone has project management experience. We're good there. So one of the things too is you may find that the HR data is not even the data that you need. So from there, start building out that skills inventory. Start understanding the most impactful skills that you need and the most impactful skills that you have, and start assigning those to people. Start, labeling that out and start giving them, those rankings or whatever when it comes to their experience, and start small. Skills is extreme. Resource management as a whole can be overwhelming. When you introduce skills into it and competency, and then also the career development of it all, just start small. Start with what you think you're going to need at the bare minimum and start tracking that. Start getting that into your tool. Start understanding the needs of the projects. So that's one thing I always tell organizations is you may not even need that HR data because it's probably not that relevant.
And
Start
sometimes
small.
we would say just that there are certain skills which are particularly scarce in organizations.
Yes.
And that may also be a good place to start in terms of just picking those kind of two or three things where we know we're always going to have a shortage of, or we know we've only got one or two in the organization. And so resourcing those particular skills are more critical than something that's kind of easily available either internally or externally.
Yes, yes, exactly. It is a thought process. You have to do a lot of reflection on this, but it's one that, like you said, if you're doing that portfolio planning work in the beginning, it's going to help your projects when things slip. When you're doing that skills thought in the beginning, it's going to help you when you need it. So that, yes, completely agree.
Excellent. So just the final bit, which kind of brings it all together, and I do find, kind of this is often where people start. It's kind of they see the huge elephant and the kind of the struggle in terms of kind of to where to start. And a lot of people said when we put the circle of resource management together in the first place, it was quite nice to see it kind of segmented out because it helps them understand what are the kind of the challenges that they're kind of facing in their organization.
Mhm.
When you've kind of worked with organizations, which areas do you think, they've seen the most impact when they start kind of seeing it as kind of these different elements where they can kind of join the dots?
Yeah. So first and foremost, any organization, any PMO who is not doing any type of resource planning, they're just doing task assigning things, maybe they're tracking time, but they're not making like resource planning use of that data. You are going to see right away, especially in a tool like Tempest, when you have something that's built for this, when people are over allocated right away, where you're going to be risks to your project right away. So if you are starting from that level of maturity with this, just get the data in, understand capacity, understand who you have, understand the projects that are currently happening, and how those people relate to them for those hours or effort or whatever that is. So that can have a huge impact right there when you're first getting started. Now, when you are more mature, I will say the largest impact is going to be at that higher level when it comes to that portfolio planning because you're doing the work, you're doing the thought process ahead of time. So that way, when things are happening as it's executing, things need to slip, new priorities come in, new client work comes in, you have a plan. Or you at least know what the original plan was and how far you need to stray from it. So I would say it really is those two ends of the spectrum. There's a lot more I can get into too, just depending on where organizations are. But I would say for this purpose, those two ends can be the most impactful.
Yeah. And interestingly, isn't it, in terms of whenever kind of we implement a tool, we you start where the organizations are and what they've got and
Yes.
kind of build outwards, isn't it? You can't kind of say, well, there's a minimum here and there's a minimum here, we have to move there. It's about kind of starting where we got and kind of moving out. And I do believe that the model helps understand kind of pinprick where some of those
Yes.
things are in place, where some of the individual challenges are. Now,
Yeah. Of
we can't get away without an AI question thrown in
course.
there, Samantha. And Lindsay and I have been trying to support the community and kind of opening people's eyes in terms of where AI is going. And how have you seen kind of AI, which is kind of being built into several of these tools, adding an extra dimension, and kind of how's that helping move beyond some of that kind of basic forecasting that some of the old kind of older versions of the systems might have had?
Yeah. So many, many years ago, we would receive feedback from people that was like, "Hey, I want AI to tell me exactly who I should be allocating to this project and when." And when you start digging into that, you start understanding like there's a lot of information that is needed in order for AI to recommend who is best on this work in this portfolio, what types of skills you are going to need, and things like that. Now, we are many years ahead, and I do think that type of information is becoming more and more available to us. The hard skills needed for things and if you have the data, let's resurface that and let's make sure we're getting that information. Truthfully, where we are seeing AI be applied today, because a lot of organizations, this is confidential information, especially if you're a product organization, they don't want AI touching these things. So then we look at, okay, how can AI best support these organizations who can't have a data learning model going on? And it's really going to be around that reporting. and surfacing the information that's needed, and hey, based on this, like, where do we have this, and where is that at? So it's really on that reporting side. And then also just, specifically in Tempest, we are introducing AI more around the usability of Tempest. So, hey, tell me how to create this, and hey, I want to set up this report, and hey, this. So we're entering that AI space in a more, let's make our product easier for customers and more accessible for our users. Um,
And I
but
think it's about, isn't it? It's about and one of those issues that's always been there in resource management is about who gets to make the decision. And I mentioned earlier,
yeah,
it's not necessarily the PMO who makes the decision on who works on one project or another project. They will
yeah,
facilitate that process. And I think that's the interesting thing in terms of people's perception versus the reality of AI. AI can
yeah,
come up with lots of suggestions. We're not, nobody's advocating that AI suddenly makes all of those decisions on behalf of the organizations. There still needs to be a resource manager who allows their resource
yes,
to be available, and a project manager who accepts that resource onto the project, and the
yep,
individual who accepts, the allocation to that task. So that human element of choice and making those
yes.
decisions, because that's where the kind of governance structure sits around the people who are making those decisions, rather than kind of just throwing it all into a tool and assuming everything's kind of then dictated by some of the results that come out of some of those reports.
Yes, yeah. And you are completely right. There needs to be that human element in it. Um, Otherwise, you don't really know where your organization's going to go if a computer is making all of those decisions. You're completely right. Yeah.
That's it. And I think to me that's one of the real things that people need to kind of help getting their head round, is that we'll still be making the decisions, but actually some of the sophisticated thinking and some of the options that might come up
Yeah.
are hugely complex, and kind of in the Excel days might have taken us kind of 3 or 4 weeks to work out. With the AI support, that can come through in a couple of seconds, if not minutes, to kind of go, well, oh yes, actually that's quite a good combination. Yes, actually that's where
Yes.
we can choose to go, and that's where the kind of the use of AI with kind of human decision making is really where the world is moving to.
Yeah. There was also one comment just made too that I know, and I know we need to move on to questions and whatnot. There was one comment made too about data accuracy. What AI is surfacing is only going to be as good as your data. It's similar with reporting. So that is a very good point as well, is if you're using AI to surface and make recommendations and find things for you, if your data is not accurate, there's really not, it's not helping you at all. So that's a very good point too.
Yes, it's like kind of, how do I build a house and all you've given me is jelly? It's not going to be working. Okay, so
Not
we've
gonna
got a
work.
yes, we've got a few questions left. Has anybody got in the audience? Has anybody got any last questions? You can either kind of put your hand up and ask directly, or you can type in the chat. If not, I have got one reserved question. Nobody's got any. Okay, well, I'm going to ask my reserved question. Is for those people who've kind of who've heard me before, I'm really big on behaviors, and obviously what we've talked about covers such a whole range of individuals and roles and processes in the organization. And essentially, if we're going to do this, and like the implementation of any system, it's going to be changing the organization, which
Yeah.
means there's going to be people, and there's going to have some kind of behavioral change, and change the way we do something. What kind of behaviors have you seen kind of help and hinder implementation of resource management, and whether that be from the PMO or whether that's from the wider organization, Samantha?
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics, and one that we start every engagement, every implementation with having this conversation. And it really comes down to, the organization's change management. One, do you have an effective change management office, or are you trained in that? Whatever that is. But really coming down to communicate. A lot of people, some organizations, the people will see resource management as micromanagement. It's, why do you need to know where I am for what, and all of those things. And I think you have to start with communication, and also understanding and sharing What problem do we think this is going to solve? So before you're even in that engagement of implementing a software, maybe you're looking for it, really communicating what you think resource management and resource planning is going to solve for your organization. And then as we get closer and as we're doing the implementation, I tell people all the time, let's start with reporting. Show people what they are going to get out of this because no one wants an extra tool, no one wants more processes, no one wants more work. So, what are they going to get out of this? And really making sure that what we're delivering as the people who are, using the software and implementing it and making sure it's getting adopted, understanding people understand the value and pivoting to that too. Sometimes the value changes and that's perfectly fine. I always tell people, let's start with the hardest to please group. Let's take them on first so that way we can get that out of the way, we can hear our toughest critics and then we can continue working from there. So I think when it comes to that behavioral shift for something like resource management, for something like adopting a tool, it's just I really comes down to like that relentless communication and also being open to pivoting when needed. If what you're surfacing, your reporting is not what someone finds helpful, what is it? What do they need? And let's see if we can get that for them. On the flip side, I think one thing that hinders this is, poor communication, of course, but also, someone brought this up earlier, data accuracy. If your data is inaccurate, it's not going to be trusted. And then no one's going to go into the tool. No one's going to check out the reports. No one's going to be motivated to do that work. Now, there comes a time when they're especially in that early planning stages, this is more of an estimation. Your resource plans are more of an estimation and a best guess and an educated guess. So yes, there's that, but you have to make sure that people are consistently updating your solution for this, and you have to make sure it's as educated as possible, and really kind of feeding into those things. So I would say when it comes to those behavioral changes, it's those two things that where we're going to see success right away, or we're going to see this is going to take a lot longer than anyone wants it to.
And I do think it interesting, isn't it? There's a couple of comments, and I've read it. I'm going to steal it. Is that simplicity will get us somewhere, and that's the
Yes.
starting point. And doing and solving the resource management problem is not a one-stop shop. It isn't a kind of a
Oh,
single thing. So once you've got that kind of simple, and that might just be 2 or 3 data points to start with. And as
yes.
you say, 2 or 3 good bits of data are better than 100 bits of rubbish data. And that's
Yes.
where we start. And then we go for incremental improvement to drive us through some of the other issues. And I know in our report, there's a number of hints and tips in terms of kind of where to start and how to get up that maturity level of resource management. So I think the time is up. Thank you very much, Samantha. We are going to have another session in the new year. And we're
Yes.
going to I think we'll have a panel session. We're going to have a kind of a wider group of people and some practitioners, some tool users to understand kind of what they're getting out of the tool and how it's helping deliver their resource management issues. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. Lindsay's put in the links in the chat for the report. She's also put in links. If you're not a member, you can get a notification of when this webinar will become available. And hopefully we'll get to see some of you at our conference in Edinburgh next week. Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks again, Samantha.
Thank you, Lee.